He swore to resist, but one touch pulled him straight into sin. The wheel pressed down heavy and merciless. Her trembling hands braced against the stranger's chest.
Step aside, ma'am.
Please, breathe,
I got this.
she whispered into the storm. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. Out of the swirling dust,
no one helped me
rode
once.
a lone cowboy, his dark coat sweeping his eyes steady as steel.
Sip
Step
slow.
aside, ma'am. I got this. His rough
Storm's
palm pulled her
nasty.
upward. The buckle of his belt loosened as his touch held both strength
I
and
was
mercy.
left too.
She asked softly, "Why help me?" His voice, low and steady, answered, "Because
You're
no
safe
one helped me
here."
once." Inside the cabin, the fire cracked its glow, warming her shoulders beneath a blanket. "Sip slow," he told her. "The storm's a nasty one." Between them, silence carried sorrow. He confessed quietly, "I was left too." Outside, the desert screamed with wind, but he stood guard, hand resting on his gun, whispering a vow that stilled her fear. "You're safe here." Ash Hollow, a small town buried deep in the heart of Wyoming at the end of the 19th century. A place where the wind carried sand like rusted blades scraping across bare skin. Sandstorm swallowed the sky, leaving only the faint glow of lantern light outside the saloon. In that hollow wind, the town suffocated not only under red dust, but under the weight of human indifference. The only doctor had long since left. The poor were abandoned to sickness and to accidents, left to fend for themselves, their lives entrusted only to fate. And into this silence walked Rosa Quinn, a woman no one welcomed, a nurse hardened by the battlefield, carrying memories of blood and steel that the townsfolk whispered about as curses. They called her bad luck. They called her a woman who didn't know her place. But Rosa had not come for acceptance. She came with an old medical bag, calloused hands, and a heart that could not turn away from another's pain. When a scream tore through the storm, a scream not of beast, but of man being crushed, Rosa ran. She fell to her knees beside a miner, pinned beneath a wagon's iron wheel, blood seeping dark into the sand. The men around her stood frozen helpless. None believed she could do anything. None wanted a woman interfering with men's work. But Rosa's voice cut through the panic, steady and commanding, like an officer on the battlefield. "If you don't want your friend to die, do exactly as I say." And in that breathless moment, a shadow appeared through the storm. Elias Crow, a cowboy of few words with gray eyes like forged steel. He was no part of that timid crowd, nor was he bound by the rules of the corrupt judge who ruled Ash Hollow with an iron grip. When Elias stepped down from his horse, silence fell. He watched. Rosa saw in her the courage that even strong men rarely held when chaos reigned. Then, without hesitation, he set his shoulder beside hers. A woman the town had cast aside, and a cowboy who lived outside the law, were the only two willing to stand together. In the flicker of oil lamps, amid blood and red dust, there rose a bitter paradox. Society turned its back, yet humanity still burned bright in the hands of those deemed weakest. And so began the story of Ash Hollow, a place where justice would not come from the courthouse, but from the courage of a nurse, and a cowboy who dared to stand against it all. Part 1. Blood Under the Wheel. Red dust blanketed the sky over Ash Hollow like a nightmare that would not end. Every pick struck the rock, every wooden wheel ground along the cracked earth, and the sounds echoed like whining metal. That day, the quarry looked no different from a battlefield. Men gasping for breath, the foreman's angry shouts, and the smell of sweat, mixed with cigarette smoke rising into the hot wind. On the hillside, Rosa Quinn rode a pale brown mare, an old cloak drawn tight over her shoulders. She had never belonged here. Whenever she passed through, the townspeople watched her with the kind of caution that treats a woman who had been a battlefield nurse like a bad omen. Still, fate asks no one's permission. The scream that tore the air that day, sudden and terrible, called her like an order. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. Her heels urged the horse down the rocky slope. Before her was a scene of horror. A ore wagon overturned its iron wheel, crushing a miner's legs. Blood darkened the sand, dust obscured his face, and all that was visible were wide eyes full of pain and despair. 3 other miners stood around pale, their hands shaking, saying over and over, "We can't lift it. It's too heavy." Rosa leaped from the saddle. Her medical bag hit her hip with a clink. She shoved the men aside and dropped to her knees beside the victim. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from memory. Sleepless nights, under the flicker of oil lamps in field hospitals, torn bodies, the cries of young soldiers. The scene before her was a battlefield again, and her body moved by reflex, the way it had 100 times before. Check the pulse, assess the wound, measure the clock that runs out. The wheel's pressing, but it hasn't severed the artery. "We've still got time," she said, her voice hoarse but certain. "You don't have any business here," an old miner snapped. "This is men's work. Go fetch the doctor." Rosa lifted her head. Her dark brown eyes flashed anger. "Dr. Morrison's been dead 2 months. If you want to stand there and let your friend bleed out while you pray for the dead to come back, be my guest, or help me lift this wheel." No one moved. Only the trapped man's agonized groans echoed off the canyon walls. Then the sound of hooves thundered from above. Strong, sure-footed, a huge black horse cut through the dust. The man on its back was broad-shouldered, and his eyes were a cold gray. Elias Crow, a name Rosa had heard whispered in the saloon. Folks said he'd once been cavalry scout, survived fights people didn't like to talk about. Now he ran a ranch near town, quiet, mysterious. He dismounted in a neat motion. His coat was dust-coated, but his back was straight. His gaze swept the scene and stopped on Rosa. In a few seconds, he read a stubborn resolve in her that few men possessed. "We need to cut the axle," Elias said in a low voice. "You fellas got a saw." The 3 miners scrambled, searching their tool bags. Elias dropped to his knees beside Rosa. His breath smelled of horse and dust, but his hands were steady and calm. He didn't argue. He didn't belittle her. He simply worked. As Elias organized the men to lift the wheel, Rosa laid a hand on the trapped man's neck and felt a fast, frantic pulse. Blood soaked through the hem of her skirt, hot, sticky. Her hand shook, but her gaze was firm. This was not the first time she'd stood at the edge of life and death. "Listen to me," Rosa whispered into the dying man's ear. "You're going to live. Look at me. Hear my voice. I've seen worse than this live through it. Don't give up." A glimmer of grasping hope flashed in his desperate eyes. "Lift 1, 2, 3, Elias shouted. Metal shrieked like an animal. For a moment the wheel rose. Rosa hauled the miner free, and blood poured out. He howled. The sound rolled across the valley. Rosa didn't hesitate. She drew a knife, cut open his trousers, exposing the wound. Bone protruded. Blood would not stop. She cinched her own belt tight above the injury, then turned to one of the three miners. "Whiskey, quick. No, there's none." "Then run to the saloon and get some. If you don't, he'll be dead in 10 minutes. The youngest of them, bolted legs kicked red with dust. Elias stood close, watching how Rosa moved. In his gray eyes, there was a strange light, perhaps respect, perhaps the recognition that this woman was nothing like the weak creature the town rumored. He took off his coat and wrapped it around the shivering man, then used his own body as a windbreak so Rosa could work. "Where were you before?" he asked quietly. "Pennsylvania. Field hospital. 3 years." He nodded slightly, the corner of his mouth lifted. 3 years for me too. Colorado Cavalry." They exchanged a brief look. In that instant, in the dust and hot blood, in the screech of metal, two people who should have been strangers recognized the same hidden wounds in each other. Blood kept coming, but Rosa's hands never stopped. She rinsed the wound with the little water left in a canteen and did a rough stitch with a packaged needle and thread. Each stitch felt like the needle cutting into her own flesh, but her eyes did not waver. Elias held the miner steady, his large hand on the man's shoulder to keep him from thrashing. "Will he live? If infection doesn't kill him first?" Rosa answered shortly. A hard gust of wind swept through, carrying the metallic smell of blood. Dust churned, as if trying to swallow everything whole. But in Rosa's mind, that moment shone bright amid the cruelty of the scene, her hands trembling, but determined were pulling a life back from the jaws of death. The whole town could cast her out. Society could scorn an unlicensed nurse. But right then, in the trapped miner's desperate eyes, Rosa was no longer the one they despised. She was his last chance. Elias watched her closely, then murmured, as if making a vow to himself, "You'll be the one to drive me straight into sin, woman." Part 2. Judge Beckett's Law. The square of Ash Hollow lay in the very center of town, a stretch of bare-packed earth, dusty in the dry season and muddy when the rains came. Along the road, crooked wooden buildings leaned into each other, and the saloon's lanterns still burned bright, a beacon of decay. That noon, the sun beat down mercilessly. The sky was clear, yet no one felt at ease. The air carried a weight as if the whole town knew something grim was about to fall. The steady rhythm of hooves echoed, bouncing off wooden walls with a chilling sound. Judge Beckett appeared. He rode a dapple gray horse, its saddle polished silver buckles gleaming under the sun. Behind him trailed 4 Pinkertons, long coats, sweeping pistols gleaming at their sides, their cold eyes slicing through the townsfolk like knives. Beckett was not just a judge. He was the law, or rather the twisting of it. The people of Ash Hollow knew that once he had decided, nothing could undo it. He smiled, little spoke less, and each word struck like a verdict. And today, his target was not a thief, nor a troublemaker. It was a woman standing in the square, her dress still stained with blood, her hands red from the miner's wounds that morning. Rosa Quinn. Rosa Quinn. Beckett's voice rang out flat and cold. "You are charged with practicing medicine without license. You interfered in the treatment of a citizen without approval, without proof of lawful training. You have broken the law." The crowd murmured. Familiar faces, those who had stood idle that morning, now stepped back, leaving space as though distance could shield them. Rosa stood alone, the wind pressing her skirt tight against her thin legs. She lifted her chin high, though her eyes flickered. "Can he really do this?" a woman whispered to her husband. "If Beckett wills it, the sky itself bends," the husband muttered, pulling her farther back. Rosa drew a deep breath. She had heard words like that since childhood, on the battlefield in the hospital tents. People always believed in power, not mercy, but this time she would not step back. "That man would have died if I hadn't acted," Rosa answered, her voice calm, yet carrying across the square. "If saving a life is a crime, then I am ready to pay the price." "One," Pinkerton laughed sharp and mocking. Beckett did not smile, but his eyes narrowed with disdain. "Saving lives," he repeated. "You think life here is yours to decide law and order do not exist, so that some strange woman can do as she pleases?" Rosa swallowed hard. Before his gaze, anyone might feel small. But then from the edge of the square, the slow beat of hooves sounded. Elias Crow stepped out of the sun. He wore no polished coat, no gleaming pistol. Only an old leather jacket, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing half his face, and gray eyes fixed coldly on Beckett. He stopped his horse in the square, dismounted with quiet ease, and walked to stand before Rosa. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The crowd gaped. No one believed a lone cowboy would place himself between the judge and the accused. Beckett's brow lifted. "Crow, I don't recall summoning you." Elias did not rush. He drew out a handkerchief and gently handed it to Rosa so she could wipe the blood from her hands. A small gesture, yet to everyone watching it, was a declaration. Then he spoke slow and deep, each word falling like a hammer. "If saving a life is a crime, then I'll share the sentence with her." A wave rippled through the crowd, gasps, head shakes, and for a brief fleeting moment, a single clap quickly silenced. Beckett sat straighter, his face darkening. "You're obstructing justice, Crow. You choose to stand with a criminal." Elias met his eyes without a blink. "I stand with life. Your law couldn't keep a man alive beneath that wheel this morning." Her hands did. No one in Ash Hollow had ever dared speak to Beckett that way. A Pinkerton's hand gripped his gun, but Beckett raised his palm, stopping him. He wanted to see how far this cowboy would go. "Careful, Crow. Once you set yourself against the law, there's no turning back." Elias's mouth curved, half a smile, half a challenge. "I've lived my whole life with no way back." Behind him, Rosa's eyes brimmed with tears. Not of fear, but of something she had never known before, someone standing beside her, willing to bear her burden. All the years of scorn and exile warmed for a moment in a cowboy's steady voice. The square hung heavy. On one side, Beckett the judge, the law, the power, the Pinkertons. On the other, Elias and Rosa, two castaways, yet upright, holding fast to one truth: saving a life is never a crime. As the wind swept red dust across the square, the image etched itself deep. A cowboy standing before a woman, silent but unyielding. And from that moment, the fight was no longer about one life, but the very soul of Ash Hollow. Part 3. The house turned into a clinic. Elias's ranch lay more than 3 miles west of Ash Hollow, perched on a gentle slope overlooking a barren valley. The wooden house was not large, its walls weathered dark by sun and wind, the roof slanted and patched with old tin. A horse shed a few broken fences and clusters of wild cactus. Everything was plain, but solid, much like the man who owned it. By the time Rosa and Elias carried the injured miner inside, night was falling. The sun sank behind the ridge, leaving a band of burning red, while cold wind swept in from the prairie, slipping through the cracks of the door. Elias laid the man on a pine table, scarred with knife marks stained with oil, worn by years of use. "This is all I have." Elias said, his voice low, a hand resting on the table as if in apology. Rosa needed no more. She rolled up her sleeves and opened her medical bag. Needles, thread, a scalpel, a few rolls of bandage, a small flask of whiskey, all old but enough to bargain with death. "Light the fire." "I need light, and I need boiling water," Rosa ordered, not looking at him. Elias only nodded, striking flame to a few dry logs. The fire crackled, spilling amber light across the wooden walls. Smoke and the scent of blood mingled in the room, stifling yet strangely familiar. The miner groaned, sweat beading across his brow. Rosa knelt close, laying a hand gently on his chest. "You have to stay with me. Do you hear?" No reply, only ragged breath. Rosa tightened the belt around his thigh and began to stitch. Her hands shook faintly, but each pass of the needle was precise. Blood spattered across her dress, yet she did not flinch. Elias stood near his eyes, fixed on her hands. He held out the whiskey. "Drink. You need to stay sharp." Rosa shook her head. "He needs it more." She soaked a rag in the liquor, cleaned the wound, then poured a stream over the shattered bone. The miner screamed and then fainted dead away. Elias gripped his shoulders firmly. His deep voice rumbled, "Enough. He'll make it, won't he?" Rosa lifted her face, sweat sliding down her temple. "I've done my part. The rest belongs to God." Silence fell. Only the whisper of the fire and the wind through the cracks. Elias pulled an old brown wool blanket from a wooden chest. He spread it over the unconscious body, each movement slow, careful, almost tender, as though laying it on kin. The blanket was heavy rough, but it carried a warmth that filled the room, driving out the chill. Rosa watched, and an unfamiliar feeling stirred within her, the sense of a home of shelter. The cowboy's blanket was not just cloth. It was a quiet vow, a sign that here, within these four wooden walls, life was honored. She sank into a chair, weary to her bones. Elias poured another glass of whiskey, setting it before her. "Drink. This one's for you." Rosa took a sip. The burn rushed to her head. She closed her eyes, leaned back, letting the firelight wash over her dirt-streaked, tired face. "You've done this before," she murmured, not a question, but a knowing. Elias sat opposite, his gaze far away. "I took a bullet once back in Colorado. A field doctor stitched me back just the way you did. I never forgot. Because that night I swore I'd never forget the hands that kept me alive." "And now you repay the debt," Rosa whispered. He nodded, half a smile, half a shadow. "A blood debt isn't paid in money. It's only paid by keeping someone else breathing." Rosa said nothing. His words, steady, deep, bound them together, a thread stretched across silence. Two strangers, two souls marked by war, now sat by a fire, sharing the one language they both understood: life. Outside, the wind still howled, but inside the wooden house, firelight flickered. A cowboy's blanket warmed the wounded man, and two pairs of eyes met in quiet recognition. No vows were spoken, no promises made. Yet a single simple act, the laying of a blanket, was enough to tell the listener this was the first moment of healing. One wound had been stitched closed, and another in both Rosa and Elias had been warmed back to life. Part 4. The saloon and the dagger nights in Ash Hollow were never truly quiet. When the sun sank and the red dust settled, the sound of a ragged piano and rough laughter in the saloon rose up, drowning even the wind of the prairie. That night, the Marigold Saloon blazed with light. Oil lamps swung from hooks, spilling warm gold across rough wooden walls. Yet beneath that glow, nothing was warm, only thick smoke, the sharp scent of cheap whiskey, and the sour sweat of men who had worked themselves to exhaustion by day and now drank to forget. Rosa stepped inside. She wore a faded gray dress, still marked with blood from the morning's work. As the door swung wide and the night wind rushed in, every eye in the saloon turned. A woman, especially a woman alone without husband or protector, was always an object of stares. Rosa was used to it. She drew a breath and walked straight to the bar, ignoring the whispers and the snickering laughter that followed. The piano faltered notes stumbling. The musician glanced at her, then pressed on, trying to keep the air alive. But her presence made the room, once noisy, strangely taut. A shout cut through from the gambling table in the corner. A thug clutched his bleeding arm, a dagger buried deep in the wood before him. Blood dripped onto the floor, red and bright. The crowd recoiled, some cursed, but no one moved to help. Rosa ran forward. "Hold his arm down," she called, opening her bag. The man struggled, cursing. "Don't touch me. I don't need no woman patching me up. You'll bleed to death before any man here fetches a doctor." Rosa snapped, her voice firm. "If you want to live, shut your mouth and let me work." She tore fabric, pressed it to the wound. Hot blood soaked through, trembling her hands. She had done this dozens of times, yet each time her pulse raced, for it was always the thin line between life and death. Laughter rippled through the room. A woman in a gaudy dress perched on a man's lap sneered, "Look at her, a husbandless woman daring to touch a man's skin. What a joke." The table roared. A drunk reached a hand toward Rosa's shoulder. In that moment, Elias rose from the corner. He walked slowly, unhurried. His calloused hand gripped the drunk's shoulder, squeezing until the man froze. Gray eyes, cold and sharp, met his without a word. The man wilted, stepping back into silence. Elias looked at no one else. He placed his hand lightly on Rosa's shoulder. The touch was quiet, without show, yet enough for every gaze in the saloon to understand she was not alone. Rosa did not turn. She only nodded faintly, as if drawing strength from it. Her hands kept working needle-thread scalpel. Blood splattered, but her eyes stayed steady. "You'll lose the arm if it isn't stitched," now she said, low but certain. Suddenly another figure stepped inside. Nia Two Elks, the native healer. Her hair was long braided and a pouch of herbs lay across her back. The saloon stilled at her entrance. Eyes followed her with a mix of suspicion and contempt, fear and disdain in equal measure. Nia walked straight to Rosa. She asked nothing, hesitated not at all. From her pouch, she drew leaves, pressing them to the wound. A clean, sharp scent filled the air, pushing back the iron tang of blood. "This will keep it from turning bad," she said in her deep, even voice, caring nothing for the stares. Rosa glanced at her, and for a moment her eyes lit. For the first time in days, she felt she was not fighting alone. As Rosa tied the final stitch, a Pinkerton strode from the back. He dropped a gleaming dagger onto the table, his voice a hiss. When you're done saving him, it'll be your turn. Want to see how steady your hands are on your own skin? The saloon went silent. The piano stopped, breath held tight. Rosa froze. But before she could speak, Elias's hand tightened on her shoulder. He bent low, his voice a rumble, just for her. Don't be afraid. I'm here. 4 words. Yet they stood like a wall. Rosa drew a breath and carried on. Each stitch cut as if into herself, but Elias's gaze, his hand on her shoulder, kept her steady. When she finished, the thug collapsed, breathing hard, alive. Rosa wiped her hands, exhausted. No applause, no thanks. Only silence. No one dared meet the eyes of the cowboy standing behind her. Once again, Rosa had been mocked in public. Once again, Elias stood for her, and this time, Nia stood too. In the glow of oil lamps, 3 figures, an outcast woman, a solitary cowboy, a native healer, formed a strange alliance against a room full of scorn. And the listener knows this was not just a scene of stitching a wound. This was the birth of a bond, the beginning of a long road where mercy and protection would stand against unjust law. Part 5. The Blood Train. Moonlight spilled silver across the Wyoming prairie, so bright that the shadows of horses stretched long on the ground. The air felt heavy, as if nature itself held its breath. From afar came the sharp, drawn-out cry of a train whistle echoing through the valley like the call of a predator on the hunt. This night, the train carried no passengers. It carried a vault federal papers gold and secrets Beckett and the Pinkertons meant to bury forever. Rumors spread through the town, a gang planned to rob it. But the truth was darker. The real thieves wore the mask of law. Rosa stood on the slope, her hand gripping the strap of her medical bag. Never had she imagined herself part of such a scene, standing under the moon beside a lone cowboy waiting for violence. But since Elias had entered her life, nothing had followed its old path. "Stay behind me." Elias said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the glow of the oncoming train. She wanted to protest, but his gaze, cold as steel, steady as stone, left her with only a nod. And strangely, in that moment, peace washed through her, though hell awaited ahead. The train roared, closer iron wheels shrieking against the rails, steam spilling white into the night. Then all at once, 3 forces emerged. From the north, a gang of masked men, guns raised. From the south, the Pinkertons' black coats, moving like trained wolves. And at the center, astride, a gray horse, Beckett. He rode proud, as if the night bent to him. Tonight, justice will punish the rebels, he roared. But the arrogant curl of his smile betrayed the truth. All of it was already in his grasp. As the train slowed, chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked the sky. Flames sparked against the dark shadows, leaping from saddles, crashing down onto the train cars. Glass, shattered screams rang out. Elias stormed into the fray. 2 Pinkertons fell beneath his gun before a heartbeat passed. His large frame moved swift, precise, relentless. He was no mere cattleman. He was cavalry once warforged, and tonight he was a storm. Rosa pressed against the train, heart-pounding eyes fixed on Elias. She saw him stand like a wall, shielding whoever he chose to protect. A bandit lunged, dagger flashing. Elias turned a clean strike, and the blade spun away, its owner crashing down. But from the other side, a Pinkerton leveled his gun, aimed at Rosa. "Elias!" she cried. The shot rang, but it did not strike her. Elias had already pulled her down, his body shielding hers. The smell of gunpowder, the worn leather of his coat, the sweat of his skin surrounded her. And in that chaos, she knew her whole world was held in his arms. Elias lifted her quickly, set her onto his horse. The moonlight caught his eyes, deep calm, amid the fire and bullets. His voice, low and solemn, brushed her ear. "Hold on to me." Rosa clung to his belt, her heart wild. Simple words, but in the storm of gunfire, they were a charm against death. Shots thundered still. The train groaned under the assault. Beckett shouted orders, yet within his own ranks, betrayal flared. A stray bullet tore through the smoke, striking his chest. He toppled from the saddle, eyes wide, mouth open, no words left to speak. It was as if fate itself demanded the toll. The judge, who had called himself the law, was devoured by his own violence. At last, the battle broke. Fire flickered on the cars. Smoke rose into the sky. The bandits scattered, the Pinkertons fled or fell. Left on the field of ruin were only Elias, Rosa, and the black horse, panting hard. Rosa clung to him, her body trembling. He turned, half his face lit by the moon. "It's over. I'll take you home." Simple words, yet after a night of blood and fire, they were salvation. In the moonlight, the cowboy was not only her protector, he was the home Rosa had never known. Part 6. The Poisoned Water. Late autumn skies hung heavy with gray clouds, the wind whistling through the valley like the cry of a lost soul. Elias led the way, his black horse straining up the slope. Rosa rode behind him, her old medical bag heavy against her hip. They had traveled for hours across barren ridges toward the high ground where the powder stream was born. Elias's voice, low and rough, told her once the water here had been so clear you could see your reflection. Now miners drank and fell sick, coughing, weakening, dying one by one. When they arrived, both froze. The stream that should have shone like glass now ran murky-tinted gray-black. Foam drifted along its surface, and a harsh stinging smell rose into the air. Rosa knelt, scooping a handful, lifting it to her nose. At once, memory flooded back, the sharp, bitter reek of phenol, of chemicals she had once used to wash the dead. Only here, the concentration was thick enough to kill livestock in a day. Elias swept aside tall grass at the bank. Beneath it lay rusted barrels, lids, broken chemicals spilling into the soil, seeping down into the current. Rosa's fists clenched, her whole body trembling. Dear God, this wasn't chance. This was done on purpose. A weak, hoarse voice came from behind. I never wanted this." They spun. From the shadows staggered a gaunt figurebeard, wild eyes sunken. Rosa knew him at once, Dr. Morrison, the man who had vanished from town without a trace. He stood swaying, clutching his chest, a ghost of the man he once was. "Where have you been hiding?" Elias demanded, hand on the butt of his gun. Morrison sank against a tree, a rasping laugh breaking from his hollow chest. "I never left. Beckett and the Pinkertons dragged me here. They forced me to sign papers saying the pollution was natural from the earth itself. In return, they spared my family." Rosa's face went pale. "Do you know how many have died? Because of this, I know." Morrison buried his face in trembling hands. "Every night I hear them, the coughing, the crying. But I was a coward. I thought if my family lived, the rest could be endured. I was wrong. I became a murderer in silence." Elias stepped forward, steel in his eyes. Rosa touched his arm, holding him back. "Let him finish." Morrison's breath came ragged, his voice broken. Their plan was to turn the water into a weapon, poison it so the miners had no choice, then sell clean water at a price no poor man could pay. Those who couldn't, they'd sicken and die. Beckett commanded it. The Pinkertons enforced it. I was the puppet who signed their crime into law. Faces flashed in Rosa's mind, the men she had stitched back together, the wounds she had healed, only to watch them waste away weeks later. Not from failure of her hands, but from water that killed slowly. Her throat tightened. Do you know what it's like to watch a patient die in your arms, not knowing why I blamed myself? All the while, it was you who stole their lives. Morrison wept, shoulder shaking. I know, and I cannot forgive myself. A faint groan rose from the brush. Elias drew his gun, moving cautious, but Rosa knew that sound. She rushed forward. Beneath the leaves lay a young miner, lips cracked skin gray, breath shallow. He's poisoned, Rosa whispered. She pulled the small flask from her bag, the only water she carried drawn from Elias's ranch well. Clear, bright under the dim light. The last pure water. Her hands shook as she lifted the boy's head, tipping the flask to his lips. Slowly now. Just a sip, she murmured, voice soft as a lullaby. The miner's swallowed throat convulsing. His dull eyes flickered with a faint spark. Rosa gave him more drop by drop as though pouring her own soul into him. Elias stood behind, silent, watching. In the midst of crime and betrayal, the sight struck him still, a woman the town had cast aside, kneeling in the mud, giving away her last water to a dying stranger. It was not medicine, it was faith. The miner's breathing steadied. His eyes fluttered shut, not safe yet, but pulled back from the edge. Rosa set the flask down, tears running. We don't have much time. If this stream stays poisoned, Ash Hollow will wither and die. Elias lowered a heavy but steady hand to her shoulder. You've done more than any doctor. You've kept the soul of this damned town alive. Rosa lifted her gaze, her eyes wet. In Elias's look, she found no pity, only respect. Something she had never known from any man here. The cold wind swept through, scattering yellow leaves across the blackened stream. Morrison slumped, head bowed, whispering, "End this crime. Don't let me die with the weight of it." The moon broke through ragged clouds, casting pale light on three figures. A cowboy with steel resolve in his eyes, a nurse shunned but unyielding in compassion, and a doctor broken, begging for redemption. Beneath them, the poisoned current flowed dark, a grim reminder that the life of all Ash Hollow now lay in the balance. Part 7. In the Dark Mine. That night the sky was moonless, clouds pressed low, and the wind screamed through the valley like a cry of doom. Elias led Rosa and Nia, two elks, to the mouth of Beckett's abandoned mine, a place left to rot after a cave-in. Morrison's words still echoed. The real proof of Beckett's scheme lay hidden here in ledgers, buried among dust and stone. The entrance yawned, black timbers, rotted beams, snapped and dangling like the ribs of some dead beast. Elias lit a lantern. Its trembling glow cast flickers across their dirt-streaked faces. "Stay close behind me," he said, voice deep and rough. Rosa nodded, clutching her medical bag. Nia carried a bundle of dried herbs, both for light and to ward off insects. Step by step they entered. The air was damp, thick with coal dust and mildew. Drops of water fell steadily from the rock ceiling, echoing like a heartbeat. Every sound magnified, and Rosa shivered. Yet she followed Elias, his lantern flame, the only star in the dark. After a stretch, stones tumbled. The ceiling quivered. Elias lifted a hand halt. "Traps," he muttered. Sure enough, fresh beams had been set, hidden under dust and coal. Someone did not want this place uncovered. Nia crouched, inhaled the earth, and nodded. Explosives placed not long ago. Elias's jaw tightened. He moved carefully forward, steering them around. Rosa's thoughts tangled in the silence. Each step she took, she felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from knowing Elias bore every danger first. He walked ahead, shouldering the risk, his broad shadow on the rock wall, making her feel both safe and afraid. At last, they reached a narrow hollow. Beneath rotting beams lay a rusted iron chest. Elias cleared the soil, braced his shoulder, and shoved hard. Metal shrieked, echoing through the cavern. The lid broke free. Inside, thick ledgers, Beckett's hand scrawled across the pages, chemical shipments, counts routes, and Morrison's forged signature. Rosa's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Each line cut into her like a blade. "This is it. This is what will save Ash Hollow," she whispered. Nia laid a hand on her shoulder, eyes solemn. Then a sharp snap. Elias spun. A tripwire taut against his boot. He lunged, shoving Rosa and Nia away. The blast roared. Rock and smoke crashed around them. When the haze thinned, Rosa coughed, gasping. The lantern rolled its flame, flickering weakly. A groan rose through the dust. Elias lay pinned under a fallen beam, blood running from shoulder to chest. Elias, Rosa cried, scrambling to him. She heaved at the timber, but it held fast. Coal smeared her face sweat, and tears burning her eyes. "Don't close your eyes. Please don't leave me." He opened his through blood and pain, a weary smile touching his lips. "Still breathing? Don't cry, Rosa. Tears don't suit you." Her hands shook as she bound his wound, each touch wringing a grimace from him. Dust tangled in his hair, his shirt soaked red, her tears falling to his chest, mingling with the blood. Together, she and Nia pushed, pride dragged, until the timber rolled aside. Rosa cradled his head in her lap, wiping dust and blood from his face, sobbing. Around them, only the flicker of the lantern and the ragged breath of the man who had shielded them. In that moment, every wall the town had built, every scorn and judgment fell away. Rosa clung to Elias as though to life itself. "You can't leave me. Do you hear I need you? Ash Hollow needs you." His breathing rasped, but his gray eyes still shone, dimming with pain. "If I live, it's because of you. Don't let go." Her tears traced his cheeks, dark against the coal dust. In the mine's darkness, amid smoke and rubble, two outcasts clung together, a cowboy and a nurse, holding each other against death. And in that fragile embrace, love and humanity sparked, burning brighter than the lantern's fading flame. Part 8. A drunken night in the saloon. Night fell like a heavy blanket, wrapping Ash Hollow in the stale scent of whiskey and coal smoke. Inside Marigold's saloon, the room swayed like a tired ship on a sea of men. The clink of glasses, the off-key stumble of a piano, rough laughter and whispers fluttering like moths. Oil lamps cast a wavering gold across worn faces, dusty planks, and the stains ground deep into tables long unwashed. It was where men came to forget to trade their burdens for cheap liquor until tonight, when Ash Hollow's mask began to slip. Rosa entered quietly, her hands still blood-stained from binding Elias's shoulder hair, matted with coal dust, eyes raw from sleeplessness. Weariness weighed heavy on her frame. Nia followed, tall and graceful, her herb satchel slung across her back, a fresh bandage still damp on her arm. Elias, broad and battered, leaned against a timber post, his wound wrapped in rough cloth, his gray eyes steady as stone. They had come back from the mine's dark belly, from the blast, the dust storm, the wreckage carrying both proof and wounds. Marigold, the saloon's keeper, looked on with layered eyes, worry, respect, a touch of fear. She had seen enough of life to recognize courage, and she knew what they had done was madness, to stand against power itself. She slipped the scarf from her shoulders, laid it across Rosa's, and drew them toward a table, tucked into the corner, away from the noise. "Sit," she said, her voice rough but warm. "I'll bring something hot." With a nod to a server, she moved quick as ever. Eyes had followed Rosa since the door opened. Now those eyes lingered in silence, caught between curiosity and unease. Word had spread like dry fire, an explosion of mine ledgers found. Tonight no one dared speak it aloud. Fear, fatigue, and a frail hope for truth held their tongues. Marigold returned with a pot of steaming tea and small cups, setting them down before sitting opposite. Her gaze flicked to Elias's bandaged shoulder. "You've broken yourself again," she rasped before a short, sharp laugh escaped. But then her voice steadied, serious. "I hear you found evidence." Rosa pulled out the small ledger, her fingernails black with coal. Lines of numbers, contracts, shipments of chemicals, signatures, Morrison's forged hand among them. "We found Beckett's book," she said. "It has names, dates, forged papers." Marigold bent low, lamp in hand, her eyes narrowing at the ink. Silence deepened, louder than the piano's tune. She laid her hand on the ledger as if on hot stone. "If this is true," she whispered, "then the whole town has been deceived. Beckett used them." At that moment, Owen Pike entered. His uniform hung loose, his face older than days past, eyes bloodshot with worry. He saw Rosa and Elias, and something torn flickered across his face. He stepped forward, eager yet cautious, for Pinkertons could be anywhere. He rested a hand on Marigold's shoulder, then spoke, voice low as wind. "I've heard it's worse than I thought." His eyes moved from Rosa to Elias, heavy with conflict duty, against conscience law, against justice. He was a man caught between two worlds, sworn to keep order, yet knowing true justice did not always live in writ or seal. Marigold poured tea, set bread, and cold meat before them. Then she began, her voice slow, like one who had carried a secret too long. "Beckett came to me last month. Polite words. Said the mines needed water for expansion. Offered money, asked for papers in return. I saw the sacks in the back, something stored for sale, but I didn't think it reached this far." Her eyes sank into her cup as though staring into a deep pit. Owen's fist clenched, bone creaking. "They told me to stay silent," he muttered. "Marshal Frost said it was for state security. But my mother..." His voice broke. A single tear slipped, caught before it fell. "They threatened her. Said if I refused..." He stopped. He didn't need to finish. They all understood. His head bowed under guilt. "I obeyed. I did things I hated. And now, with the truth out, I don't know where to stand." His words landed like a knife on the table. Owen could help them more than anyone, access to records, to vaults, to men. But he was bound by fear for his kin. Marigold leaned forward, her face hard. "Your mother may live. But if this is buried, the whole town dies." Beckett and Frost gamble with every life here. You must choose stand with the living or against them, and live with that choice forever. Silence pressed long on Owen. At last his breath left slow. His eyes brightened decision forming. I have to save her, he whispered, but I cannot let them burn this town. He looked up, meeting Rosa and Elias with steady eyes. I'll help, but we must be wise. If Frost still commands men, they'll strike hard. Rosa's heart tightened, fear and relief bound together. Owen was the bridge they needed, but he would bleed for it. Thank you, she whispered, but be careful. If they learn, you stand with us. She left the words unfinished. Too clear already. Elias stayed quiet, his eyes fixed on the window where night pressed deeper. He knew a reckoning was coming, not just guns, but a war for truth itself. Marigold drained her cup, then rose. The sound of her wooden shoes struck firm across the floor. When she turned, her voice had changed iron in its tone. I've lived long enough to know when to rise. I was forced into wrong, but now, I'll bring it to light. Her declaration hushed the saloon. Some turned away, some lowered their heads, yet in a few, a spark of courage caught. Owen scanned the room, then spoke low. I'll take the keys. I'll open the bank records. I know who guards the ledgers. Frost believes all locks his alone, but pride blinds him. Tomorrow night we move. Quietly. Rosa heard his words like hammer on stone. Fear and hope pulsed together. She glanced at Elias. His eyes were steady on the room, measuring. When at last they met hers, there was a silence, a quiet pact. He was here, not for law, but for her. She leaned close, whispering for him alone. If I die tomorrow, at least tonight, I know I'm not alone. The words were simple, heavy as stone laid on his heart. Elias drew a breath, placed his hand over hers, holding firm. Not as a promise, but as a presence. Around them, the piano faltered, then a voice rose, rough with drink. A song began, cracked and tired, a brief feast before the storm. Marigold returned, laying bills on the table. Her voice lowered. Rest. Tomorrow we fight the greater war. At the door, Owen paused, bending toward Rosa. I'll pass word through my brother. He knows a smith who can break Frost's locks. We'll need every hand, no matter how small. Don't let them snuff this fire. Then he slipped into the night, a promise carried into shadow. Rosa sat in that quiet moment, Elias's touch still warm on her hand. Outside, the wind swept dust along the streets, carrying rumor and hope. And within her resolve, kindled the truth would be brought into the light, no matter the cost. That night, Marigold's saloon became the heart of rebellion. A room steeped in liquor, but beneath the haze and rough laughter, another fire had been lit, the fire of humanity and courage. And as they stepped back into the dark, each bore wounds, secrets, and burdens, but one certainty above all: they were no longer alone. Part 9. The Trap. Turned inside out. That morning, Ash Hollow did not feel like itself. The sky was clear, yet red dust drove hard on the wind, swirling across the packed earth square, as if it meant to claw the town open. The usual clatter, the smith's hammer, the hoofbeats, a child's cry gave way to urgent whispers. Men left their picks and shovels. They drifted toward the center of town. Word flew faster than gun smoke. Rosa Quinn would turn herself in. From every narrow street, miners came in small knots. They were thin backs, bent by work hands, calloused clothes patched and repatched. Women carried children, close against their chests, tired eyes holding the faintest spark of hope. Many had cursed Rosa's name, called her bad luck. But today, a different question stirred. Would she really stand before the Pinkertons? Amid the uneasy crowd, Rosa appeared. Her faded gray dress was dusty. Her hair was tied back from a face drawn but set. In her hands, she held a thick ledger with iron-worn corners, the book she had risked her life to bring out of the dark. Her steps were not hurried, but each one landed sure like a nail driven into wood. Elias Crow followed at her back. He did not need to speak. His presence alone shifted the crowd like wind on water. Tall frame, dark leather coat, the Colt at his hip. Gray eyes fixed ahead. Every step said the same thing to reach her: you'd have to go through me. They climbed the wooden steps of the courthouse, the place where Beckett had once ruled, where too many had stood shaking. Beckett was dead now, but his shadow still lay across the square. Owen Pike waited there in a faded blue uniform face, hollowed by sleepless nights. When he saw Rosa, he gave a small nod, slight but clear. He would not let her stand alone. Hoofbeats rolled like thunder. From the west, a squad of Pinkertons rode in black coats, flaring tall horses blowing bright pistols catching the sun. Instinctively, the townsfolk fell back, opening a ring. Their captain raised his voice, rough and carrying, "That woman has practiced medicine without license, interfered with treatment, endangered this town. Hand her over." Rosa's grip tightened on the ledger. The wind riffled its pages. She lifted her chin. Her voice rang like a bell. "I did not come to hide. I came to bring the truth into the light." She raised the book, eyes fixed on her. The murmurs rippled like surf. "These are signatures and invoices, the number of barrels Beckett and his men dumped into our water. This is why your parents cough themselves weak, why your children fail. This is a crime, not a sickness born of nature." A rumble moved through the crowd. A young mother began to sob, clutching her thin boy. An old miner rasped, "Lord, I knew it. The water never tasted sweet again." One Pinkerton spurred forward to snatch the ledger. A shot cracked. Dust jumped where the bullet struck the ground at his horse's feet. The rider jerked back. The shooter was Elias Crow. He stepped ahead, gun steady in his hand-eyes, like a cold blade. His voice carried across the square. "No one takes that book from her." Silence tightened. The townsfolk held their breath. The Pinkertons glanced from one to another, hands hard on their grips. The hush pulled taut as wire. One tug and blood would spill. Then an older Pinkerton, silver in his beard, eased his pistol down. He stared at Rosa a long time, then looked to his fellows. His voice was hoarse, a little unsteady. "We've killed enough innocents. I won't fire another shot." The small motion struck like a spark. A younger agent, eyes lost and tired, let his revolver fall. Two more followed. Each clatter of steel on dirt rang sharp, but to the miners it sounded like the first bars of freedom. Their captain shouted, "Traitors, have you all gone mad?" His rage thinned into the rising buzz of voices. Another agent, stubborn, still drew on Rosa. "That woman dies," he barked. Rosa stood her ground, clutching the ledger, eyes closing against the shot she expected. Elias stepped in front of her. He didn't raise his gun. Slowly, he crouched and laid his silver Colt on the cracked ground. His voice carried low, clear, like a vow spoken under church rafters. Enough. No more blood. The square held its breath. It was not surrender. It was a challenge of conscience. Elias stripped himself of the weapon. turning the choice on everyone present. Either gun down the unarmed in front of the whole town or stop. The miners began to move. A few men stepped first to stand beside Rosa and Elias. Then more. In moments, a ring of bodies formed thin, worn frames hardened by fury and need. The gunman's hand shook. Sweat beaded at his temple. He looked around at his own comrades, wavering at the miners, pressing in at the woman weeping into her child's hair. His arm sagged. The pistol dropped. A cheer burst loose one voice, then many rolling like a wave. Rosa stood still, eyes wet. She turned to Elias and whispered for him alone. "You gave them faith, and you gave me life." Elias nodded, once his large hand closing over hers, warm sure. In that instant, they were no longer outcasts. They were the heart of a town turning itself toward a different fate. On the steps, Owen Pike lifted his voice. "Hear me, we are no one's boot heel anymore. From this day, Ash Hollow will be led by truth, not by crooked law." The square erupted. Miners raised their fists. Women clutched their children, and the Pinkertons, who'd lowered their guns, bowed their heads. Beckett's trap, to make Rosa the criminal, had been turned inside out. It was truth, mercy, and trust that lifted a cast-off into a guiding flame. Part 10. The Trial in the Sandstorm. That afternoon, the sky over Ash Hollow seemed to go mad. From the desert came howling winds, hurling sand that stung every face. Folks covered their mouths with cloths. Heads bowed, yet no one stayed home. The whole town moved toward Marigold's saloon. Tables and chairs had been cleared, turning it into a makeshift courtroom. Beckett was gone. The official courthouse no more, but the people knew justice could not wait. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow over weathered faces packed tight together. A long table stood in the center, serving as the bench. Owen Pike sat at its head, young in years, but steady in his gaze. On either side were miners' women, even the Pinkertons who had laid down their guns the day before. They had not come merely to listen. They had come to bear witness. Rosa sat at the front, the heavy ledger laid before her. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of truth carried in those pages. Beside her stood Elias, his shoulder still bound, his eyes calm solid as a wall at her back. The door burst open. A rush of wind swept in, carrying with it Frost, the Marshal of Wyoming. His coat was dusted with grit, his frame tall, his face hard as stone, his eyes cold and sharp. His stride was proud, but deep within flickered unease. He knew this town was no longer the same. "Begin," Frost growled. Owen struck his hand on the table, his voice clear. "Today, we hear testimony. No more bribes, no false laws, only truth." Rosa rose. At first, her voice shook, but each word grew firmer. "I am not a doctor. I was only a nurse on the battlefield. But I know clean water from poisoned water. I watched miners cough their lungs raw. I saw children waste away. I believed it was my fault until I found this ledger." She opened it and read aloud lists of chemical barrels, dates Morrison's forged signature. Each line landed like a hammer on wood. Murmurs rose, swelling into anger. Morrison was brought forth gaunt yet brighter-eyed than in months. With tears, he confessed, "I signed. I was forced. My family threatened. But the miners' deaths haunted me every night. Beckett was wrong. I was wrong. And Frost?" His voice lifted, steadying, as he looked straight at the marshal. "You knew, and you turned away." The room erupted. Frost's jaw tightened, and he roared, "I did it to keep order. You think this pitiful town could survive without my law? I sacrificed a few to save the many. A gray-haired miner stood, hands trembling. Save who? My boy's in the ground. My wife's beside him. That's your law. Voices rose one after another. A young mother, clutching her thin child, cried out, "We don't need saving, bought with our blood anymore." Outside, the storm beat against the saloon wood, rattling. Inside, the people's voices rose louder than the wind. Owen slammed his palm on the table, his voice ringing, "Order Frost. You stand accused of aiding Beckett, of covering his crimes, of scorning human life. What do you say?" Frost stood silent. Wind whistled through the cracks, dragging sand across the floorboards. At last, he gave a rough laugh full of scorn. "You think a mob of farmers can judge a marshal of this state?" In answer, people stood, one by one, a miner, a mother, a silver-bearded Pinkerton, then the whole room. They spoke not a word, but their eyes fixed on Frost. No guns, no fists, only truth carried by many. Owen declared, his voice steady as iron. "Frost, you are guilty. From this day on, Ash Hollow will write its own law, with sweat and blood, not with your deceit." Frost snarled, reaching for his gun. But instantly, dozens of barrels leveled on him, from miners, from Pinkertons who had turned. He froze. His eyes blazed, then his hand dropped. The pistol hit the wood with a hollow thud, the sound of an ending. The room held its breath. Then cheers broke, first a single shout, then swelling into thunder. People embraced, some wept, some laughed, as though chains unseen had shattered. Rosa sank onto a chair, tears streaming. She had carried the weight of exile and blame so long, only to see truth finally heard. Elias sat beside her, his hand calloused from rope, and reins from trigger and toil gently lifted her face. With a thumb, rough but tender, he brushed away a tear. "Cry," he said softly, voice warm as a hearth fire. But this time, they are tears of freedom. Through her blurred gaze, she saw his eyes, and in them a new faith. Outside, the storm raged on. But within the lamplight of Marigold's saloon, Ash Hollow had found its justice not with bullets, but with courage and truth. And in the midst of cheers, one image lingered, the outcast nurse and the lone cowboy side by side, sharing a moment, small yet human. An ending not of blood, but of healing. Love remains. Dawn spilled over Wyoming. The first light poured across the distant ridges, turning the endless prairie a shimmering gold. A gentle breeze carried the scent of earth after the sandstorm, the dryness of hay and the sweetness of wildflowers. After days of blood and fire, Ash Hollow at last awoke to a morning of peace. On the rise near Elias's wooden cabin, the townsfolk gathered. They brought worn chairs, old tablecloths, and bunches of wildflowers hastily picked by the stream. There was no grand church, no finery, no choirs, yet in their eyes, this day was sacred, the wedding of Rosa Quinn and Elias Crow. Rosa stepped from the small room wearing a simple dress of ivory white, stitched and pressed by the women of the town. A thin lace veil drifted in the breeze. Her cheeks warmed under the weight of so many gazes, yet her heart swelled with a quiet joy. From an outcast, she now walked forward as one who was welcomed, one who was loved. Elias waited at the cabin door. His suit was rough, ill-fitting, but his eyes shone steady as stone. As Rosa approached, he held out his broad, calloused hand, a hand worn by reins and guns. She laid her smaller hand in his, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The little church bell of Ash Hollow, rang uneven but true. Children's laughter danced across the meadow. Sparrows burst into the sky, wheeling like nature's blessing. The people smiled. Some mothers wiped tears from their eyes. Morrison, once broken by guilt, stood quietly at the back, bearing witness to forgiveness. Owen Pike, in his faded uniform, managed a rare smile pride glinting in his gaze. There was no priest. Instead, Marigold stepped forward to officiate. She placed her weathered hands upon their shoulders, her rough voice carrying steady across the prairie wind. You have faced the storm. You have stood against death and exile. Today, before your people and before the wide sky, you choose to hold each other's hand. That is the truest vow. Rosa lifted her tear-bright eyes to Elias. He leaned close, his voice a low murmur. Only for her, I have wandered a long road, searching for a place to belong. And that place is you. Through her tears, she smiled. If this west is harsh, then you are my shelter. When they kissed, applause rolled like thunder rising above the wind. The wedding was humble, but for Ash Hollow, it was rebirth. By evening, the whole town feasted together. Wooden tables were set in the meadow, heavy with warm bread and roasted meat. Children ran wild through the grass, laughter ringing. Grown men raised cups, retelling the trials they had endured, the poisoned water, the collapsing mine, the day truth turned the square. But most of all, they told of a nurse and a cowboy who dared to stand. Rosa looked around, her chest full. Ash Hollow was no longer a barren outpost. It was a community hand in hand. In every smile, in every shared story, she saw it clear: love and compassion had saved this place. As the sun sank, Elias led Rosa into their cabin. It was small, plain, but warm. Fire crackled in the hearth, lighting the two hands woven tightly together. Outside, the night wind whispered across the prairie like a lullaby. Their wedding night held no luxury, no lavish music. It was peace, the peace of two scarred hearts finding one another at last. It was healing. And so the story of Ash Hollow did not end with a gunfight, nor with blood on the dust, but with church bells, children's laughter, and two hands clasped tight. In the harsh frontier, love and kindness proved the one force strong enough to mend all wounds. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment, subscribe, and share. For cowboy love is not just a legend, it is a faith we must hold on to.